Welcome to the lands of science fiction stories. I wish you a pleasant listening experience.
In the heart of the cosmos, the Galactic Federation Council Chamber stood as a monument to peace and diplomacy. Alien species from every corner of the galaxy gathered to resolve conflicts and ensure balance. Among them, the Veni Princess Estelle often took center stage, her tall and elegant frame the embodiment of regal authority. Her gray skin shimmered under the chamber's artificial lighting, and her sharp blue eyes scanned the gathered representatives, each from powerful intergalactic nations. At the head of the table, Estelle addressed the tension between the Yogi and Malarian factions, both accusing one another of territorial infringements. The Yogi, tall, yellow-skinned creatures with graceful movements, stood aligned with the Malarians, hairy, aggressive beings known for their military might. Estelle's voice, calm but commanding, broke through the rising tensions. This council exists to prevent such confrontations. I will not have it reduced to false claims and threats of war. The Malarian representative, a grizzled warrior named Malai, sneered. False claims? My nation is insulted daily as the Yogi pirates invade our territory. We will not sit idle while our rights are trampled. Estelle clenched her fists, her diplomatic facade cracking. She opened her mouth to respond, but a figure in the back of the room caught her eye. Solomon, the human representative, lounged casually in his seat, observing the scene with an unreadable expression. Humans were newcomers to the Federation, largely ignored by the larger powers. But Estelle found Solomon intriguing. There was a quiet intensity to him that belied his race's modest reputation. He often spoke little, but when he did, his words were laced with a deeper meaning, hinting at a wisdom beyond his years. Solomon met her gaze and offered a slight nod. Taking his cue, she pressed forward, her voice firm. We will investigate these claims, but this council will not be rushed into rash actions. The Federation's purpose is to preserve peace. Malai's eyes narrowed. Peace, princess? Or submission? Estelle felt the weight of his accusation but pushed it aside. You have my word, this issue will be handled with the utmost care. Later that evening, Estelle found herself in her private quarters, her mind still racing from the council meeting. She paced the room, trying to shake the growing sense of dread that gnawed at her. The Malarians were restless, and the Yogis seemed more than eager to support their aggression. A knock at her door pulled her from her thoughts. Enter, she called, expecting her aid. Instead, Solomon stepped in, his usual laid-back demeanor replaced with something colder, sharper. Princess, he began, his voice low. I need to talk to you about the council, and about humanity. Estelle raised an eyebrow, surprised. Humanity? You're barely a blip on the Federation's radar. What could your people possibly contribute to this crisis? Solomon's lips twitched into a small smile, but there was no humor in his eyes. That's the thing about us. You don't understand us yet. None of you do. He took a seat, his gaze piercing. Humans aren't like the rest of the galaxy. We don't play by your rules. Estelle crossed her arms, unsure where this was leading. What are you suggesting? Solomon leaned forward, his tone dark. You've all been too focused on your traditions, your diplomacy. But you've never faced a species like humanity. We've lived through horrors. We've learned to adapt, to survive, to dominate. Estelle felt a shiver run down her spine. Solomon's calm intensity was unnerving. What do you mean? He paused, choosing his next words carefully. Let me ask you this, if the Federation falls apart, if war breaks out, who do you think will rise from the ashes? She frowned, not understanding his implication. The Malarians? The Yogis? One of the great powers. Solomon shook his head slowly. No. It'll be us, humans. Because when the dust settles, we'll be the only ones left standing. Estelle's heart skipped a beat. Are you threatening us? No, princess. I'm giving you a choice. He stood, towering over her. Invite us into your war council. Give humanity a leading role in this conflict. Or watch as we take it ourselves. The next cycle, humanity was officially brought into the War Council, much to the displeasure of the larger powers. The Malarians and Yogis viewed humans as insignificant, a species too young and too weak to understand the complexities of interstellar conflict. But Estelle saw something different. She saw the same intensity in Solomon's generals that had unsettled her in their private meeting. General Top, a grizzled and broad human with a voice like thunder, took the lead. He didn't speak with the elegance of the other council members. His words were blunt, his demeanor unyielding. "The war's already started," Top growled. "And you're all losing." The alien representatives bristled at his arrogance, but none dared interrupt him. Estelle watched from her seat, her heart pounding as the human laid out a strategy so ruthless, so efficient, that it made her stomach turn. "We hit them where they're weakest," Top continued. "In their supply lines. Their colonies. We make them bleed until there's nothing left. And we don't stop until the Malarians and yogis are begging for mercy." Estelle's mind raced. She had brought the humans into this conflict to preserve peace, but now it was clear that humanity had no interest in peace. They thrived on conflict, on dominance. And Solomon, who had seemed so gentle, had known all along. As the council adjourned, Estelle approached Solomon, her voice trembling. "Is this what you wanted all along? To make humanity the galaxy's apex predator?" Solomon's expression was unreadable. "No, princess. This is what was always going to happen. You just didn't know it yet." As the humans began to take a more active role in the War Council, the atmosphere in the Federation grew tense. Every passing cycle, more and more alien species grew wary of humanity's growing influence. The war had escalated beyond anything they had anticipated. The Malarians and yogis, once so confident in their dominance, were now feeling the strain of an enemy they didn't fully understand. Estelle sat in her chambers, reading reports of skirmishes across the galaxy. Human fleets had been hitting Malarian outposts with frightening precision. Entire colonies were falling silent, their communications cut off, their populations disappearing without a trace. It wasn't just military installations that were being targeted, everything was a target for humanity. She felt a knot forming in her stomach as she read about a yogi stronghold that had been obliterated by a human strike team. It wasn't the destruction that disturbed her, it was the method. The humans had infiltrated the base under the cover of darkness, capturing the yogi leaders and broadcasting their executions across the galaxy. It was barbaric. It was brutal. It was effective. The door to her quarters opened without a knock. Estelle looked up, startled, to see Solomon entering, his usual laid-back demeanor gone. His face was pale, his eyes hollow. "We need to talk," he said, his voice strained. Estelle set down the report. "I don't think we have anything to talk about, Solomon. You've made it clear what your people are capable of." Solomon walked over to her desk, leaning on it with both hands. "It's not that simple. This war, it's spiraling out of control. I didn't want this." She stared at him, incredulous. "Didn't want this? You brought your people into this war, knowing full well what would happen. You warned me, remember? The force of power, you called it?" Solomon's face twisted with guilt. "I know. I knew what would happen if we got involved, but I didn't think it would get this bad. The generals, they're not stopping. They're pushing harder, faster. They're not just fighting a war anymore, they're trying to prove something." Estelle stood, her hands shaking with anger. "Prove what? That humanity is the apex predator? That you're the most dangerous species in the galaxy?" Solomon's gaze dropped to the floor. "Yes. That's exactly what they're trying to prove." The next day, the War Council convened again. Estelle sat at the head of the table, flanked by the other alien representatives. The tension in the room was palpable. The Malarians and yogis were furious, their leaders barely able to contain their rage as they watched the humans take control of the war effort. General Top stood at the center of the room, a hollow map of the galaxy projected behind him. He spoke in short, clipped sentences outlining the next phase of their strategy. Every alien in the room knew what was coming. It was the complete and total destruction of the Malarian homeworld. "This is madness," the yogi ambassador muttered under his breath, but no one dared challenge the human general directly. Estelle's heart pounded as she watched the scene unfold. She wanted to speak, to object, but the words wouldn't come. The humans were in control now, and there was nothing she could do to stop them. As the meeting adjourned, Solomon caught her eye from across the room. He didn't approach her this time, but the look on his face spoke volumes. He was trapped, just like she was. Trapped in a war that had become a proving ground for humanity's darkest instincts. That night, Estelle tossed and turned in her bed, haunted by the images of destruction and death she had seen in the war reports. She could feel the weight of the galaxy pressing down on her. The fate of millions rested in her hands, and yet she felt powerless to stop what was coming. A soft chime echoed through her quarters, signaling a visitor. She groggily sat up, rubbing her eyes. "Enter." The door slid open, and Solomon stepped inside, his expression unreadable. He moved with an eerie calm, as if the weight of the world had finally crushed any resistance within him. "We need to talk," he said, his voice almost a whisper. Estelle motioned for him to sit, though she wasn't sure she wanted to hear what he had to say. Solomon sat across from her, running a hand through his disheveled hair. "It's gone too far, Estelle. The generals, they won't stop. They've tasted blood, and now they're hungry for more." She narrowed her eyes. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying—" Solomon hesitated, his voice barely a murmur. "I'm saying we need to find a way to end this. Before it's too late." Estelle stood, pacing the room. "And how exactly do you propose we do that? Your people have taken over the War Council. They're leading the charge. They won't listen to me." "They'll listen to me," Solomon said quietly. "I can make them listen. But you have to give me something in return." Estelle stopped in her tracks, turning to face him. "What do you want?" Solomon leaned forward, his eyes dark and intense. "Humanity needs to be recognized for what it is. We're not just another species in this galaxy. We're the apex predator. And the galaxy needs to fear us." Estelle felt a chill run down her spine. "You want me to, what? Acknowledge humanity as the most powerful species in the galaxy?" Solomon nodded. "Yes. Publicly. If you do that, I'll rein in the generals. I'll stop the slaughter." She stared at him, her mind racing. Could she really do this? Could she publicly declare humanity as the dominant species in the galaxy? It would be a betrayal of everything the Federation stood for. But the alternative was unthinkable. After a long silence, Estelle nodded. "Fine. I'll do it. But you'd better keep your word, Solomon." Solomon stood, a look of grim satisfaction crossing his face. "You have my word, Princess. Humanity will take its place as the galaxy's apex predator. And the war will end." The council chamber was eerily quiet as Estelle stood at the podium. Representatives from every major species in the galaxy filled the seats, their eyes locked on her. The tension in the room was palpable, each breath held in anticipation of her next words. Her heart raced. What she was about to do went against every principle she had been raised with, everything the Federation stood for. But Solomon's ultimatum hung over her like a shadow. The war had to end, and this was the only way to ensure it didn't consume the galaxy. She looked out into the sea of alien faces, her voice steady despite the turmoil inside. "Today, I stand before you not only as the representative of the Vani people but as a witness to the power that has been unleashed upon our galaxy. Humanity has proven, beyond a shadow of a doubt, that they are unlike any species we have encountered before. They have risen to the challenge of war with an intensity and ferocity that none of us could have anticipated." Murmurs spread through the crowd, uneasy glances exchanged between the representatives. Estelle pressed on, her hands gripping the edges of the podium. "It is with great reluctance that I must acknowledge what we all now know to be true: humanity is the galaxy's apex predator. Their strength, their resilience, their capacity for war is unmatched. And we must respect that. We must fear it." Gasps echoed through the chamber, the weight of her words sending a shockwave through the room. Estelle could feel the eyes of every representative on her, but one gaze in particular burned into her, Solomon's. He stood at the back of the room, arms crossed, his expression grim but satisfied. She had delivered his message. "The war with the Malarians and the Yogi must end," Estelle continued, her voice resolute. "We will negotiate peace. But let it be known that from this day forward, humanity's place in this galaxy is undeniable. We will all learn to coexist with this new power, or we will face the consequences." She stepped down from the podium, her heart pounding in her chest. It was done. The words had been spoken. The galaxy would never be the same. Epilogue: The Price of Power. 2 cycles later, the war was over. The Malarians and the Yogi had sued for peace, their fleets devastated by humanity's relentless onslaught. The Federation's remaining powers had no choice but to acknowledge humanity's dominance. The Council was reshaped, with humans holding a place of power they had never dreamed of before. Estelle sat alone in her quarters, staring out at the stars. The galaxy had been saved, but at what cost? She had made a deal with the devil, and now humanity stood at the top of the food chain, its power unchecked, its ambitions unknown. A chime echoed through her room. She didn't need to look to know who it was. Enter. Solomon stepped inside, his usual calm demeanor replaced with a solemn weight. He approached her desk but didn't sit, his gaze distant as he spoke. It's done, princess. The war is over. Estelle didn't look up. At what price, Solomon? How long before your people turn on the rest of us? How long before you decide the galaxy isn't enough? Solomon sighed, his shoulders slumping. I don't know. But you were right. We are the apex predator. And now the galaxy knows it. She turned to face him, her eyes filled with sadness. And what will you do with that power? He met her gaze, and for the first time, she saw the men behind the politician. He looked tired, burdened by the weight of what he had unleashed. I'll try to keep them in check. But I can't promise anything. The hunger for power, it's a force of its own. Estelle stood, walking to the window and gazing out at the stars. I just hope that when the next war comes, we're ready for what your people will become. Solomon's voice was soft, almost a whisper. I hope so too. Without another word, he turned and left, leaving Estelle alone in the quiet of her quarters, the stars twinkling like distant reminders of the battles fought and the power that now reigned supreme in the galaxy. Humanity had claimed its place at the top. And the galaxy would never be the same again. The end.